Imperative that all communities have local alcohol plans and that communities are directly engaged in having their say.
I call Dennis O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to speak on SOP 109 in the name of Charles Chevelle, and I want to begin by repeating that New Zealand First has full faith in local democracy with regard to local area policies, LAPs, and we therefore think that it is important that they be mandatory. And in that respect, I'd like to say that I listened carefully to what the Minister said and did not hear any real argument why they should not be mandatory. I did agree with a lot of what she said about the need for local policy making as far as alcohol, a local alcohol regime is concerned. As far as small local authorities are concerned, I am absolutely convinced that each and every one of them could easily handle this function. After all, they would have the support of Local Government New Zealand, which often helps small local authorities with many things, and it would certainly help them with these particular plans. They can also look at what larger local authorities are doing and perhaps even work collaboratively with other local authorities in the development of their plans. And of course, smaller authorities can in fact have smaller and simpler local policies. That would be probably quite appropriate for many of them. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't think it's any great imposition at all that we should make the development of local alcohol policies mandatory for smaller and larger, and in fact each and every one of New Zealand's local authorities. And Mr. Chairman, the situation regarding trading hours are a very good example why local authorities must set those, and they must not be done by Parliament through the Section 44 default provision. And if that is the case, then there would be no need for any amendment to those default hours as proposed by some members. New Zealand First thinks that those default hours are far too liberal and should be more restrictive, but we would not wish to do so by amending this legislation. Instead, we would like to see local authority policies, alcohol policies, be mandatory, and the fact that those liberal hours are liberal will encourage those local authorities to have a good look at what they think is appropriate for their particular districts. And they need to reflect local needs. For example, if you look at Queenstown, you would expect that they would want local policies regarding trading hours to be more liberal, whereas, for example, you might expect a city like Invercargill to have more restrictive hours. And one would understand why, and that would be very appropriate. But it is important that those two and all other local authorities actually set those hours themselves and not rely on default provisions as set out in Section 44. Now, with regard to SOP 109, I fully agree with Mr. Chevelle's proposal regarding Clause 45. It would simply be redundant if the requirement for local authority alcohol plans, LAPs, was mandatory. And Clause 46, the proposals he makes there would also be appropriate. They are consequential. And I note also he proposes the same amendment to Clause 75 as Kevin Haigh has proposed, replacing in that section the word may with the word must. And that is, as I said before, all it takes and is most appropriate. I would finally like to mention the amendments to Clause 77, which Mr. Chevelle has proposed. And I believe they should be adopted as well. I like very much what he has done in respect of the policies which would be mandatory, especially those in subclause 1, relating to the location of licensed premises with regard to broad areas, and secondly, the location of licensed premises by reference to proximity to premises or facilities of particular kinds. And there's already been some debate about that. Also, the process for managing intoxicated people, and whether, Mr. Chairman.
Call Dr. Jackie Blue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very pleased to speak on Part 3 of the Alcohol Reform Bill.